Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for coming together to immerse ourselves in this rich body of wisdom we call Torah that we both receive and contribute to and share with generations yet to come. This week we are in Parshat Mishpatim, which is in the book of Exodus, chapter 21, beginning with verse 1. We'll read through the English translation of our entire Torah portion. Then I'll share with you a focused study about it, and then we will launch into our collaborative conversation about it. If you'd like to go ahead and unmute it this time, together we can recite our blessing, giving thanks for the opportunity of this moment. Baruch
Baruch
atah
atah Adonai
Eloheinu
Eloheinu
melech
melech
haolam,
haolam
asher
asher
kiddushanu
kiddushanu
b'mitzvotav
b'mitzvotav
v'tzivanu
v'tzivanu
la'asok
la'asok
b'divrei
b'divrei
Torah.
Torah. Amen.
Thank you, God, for the opportunity of this moment to immerse ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah.
Amen.
I'll share with you the opening verses from Parshat Mishpatim, and then I'll invite others to have an opportunity to read as well. Book of Exodus, chapter 21, verse 1. These are the rules that you shall set before them. When you acquire a Hebrew slave, he shall serve 6 years. In the 7th year, he shall go free without payment. If he came single, he shall leave single. If he had a wife, his wife shall leave with him. If his master gave him a wife and she has borne him children, the wife and her children belong to the master, and he shall leave alone. But if the slave declares, I love my master and my wife and children, I do not wish to go free, his master shall take him before God. He shall be brought to the door or the doorpost, and his master shall pierce his ear with an awl, and he shall then remain his slave for life. June, would you like to continue there at verse 7?
Thank you, Rabbi. When a man sells his daughter as a slave, she shall not be freed as male slaves are. If she proves to be displeasing to her master, who designated her for himself, he must let her be redeemed. He shall not have the right to sell her to outsiders, since he broke faith with her. And if he designated her for his son, he shall deal with her as is the practice with free maidens. If he marries another, he must not withhold from this one her food, her clothing, or her conjugal rights. If he fails her in these 3 ways, she shall go free without payment. He who fatally strikes a man shall be put to death. If he did not do it by design, but it came about by an act of God, I will assign you a place to which he can flee. When a man schemes against another and kills him treacherously, you shall take him from my very altar to be put to death. He who strikes his father or his mother shall be put to death. He who kidnaps a man, whether he has sold him or is still holding him, shall be put to death. He who insults his father or his mother shall be put to death.
Thank you, June. Let me invite Jim, if you'd like to continue there at verse 18.
Thank you, Rabbi. When men quarrel and one strikes the other with stone or fist, and he does not die, but has to take his bed, if he then gets up and walks outdoors upon his staff, the assailant shall go unpunished, except that he must pay for his idleness and his cure. When a man strikes his slave, male or female, with a rod, and he dies there and then, he must be avenged. But if he survives a day or two, he is not to be avenged, since he is the other's property. When men fight and one of them pushes a pregnant woman and a miscarriage results, but no other damage ensues, the one responsible shall be fined according to his husband, what woman's husband may exact from him, the payment to be based on reckoning. But if other damage ensues, the penalty shall be for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise.
Thank you, Jim. Margot, would you like to continue there at verse 26?
Yes, thank you. When a man strikes the eye of his slave, male or female, and destroys it, he shall let him go free on account of his eye. If he knocks out a tooth of his slave, male or female, he shall let him go free on account of his tooth. When an ox gores a man or a woman to death, the ox shall be stoned, and its flesh shall not be eaten. But the owner of the ox is not to be punished. If, however, that ox has been in the habit of goring, its owner, though warned, has failed to guard it, and it kills a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned, and the ox and the owner too shall be put to death. If ransom is paid upon him, he must pay whatever is laid upon him to redeem his life. So too, if it gores a minor, male or female, the owner shall be dealt with in accordance with the same rule. But if the ox gores a slave, male or female, he shall pay 30 shekels of silver to the master, and the ox shall be stoned. When a man opens a pit or digs a pit and does not cover it, and an ox or an ass falls into it, the one responsible for the pit must pay restitution. He shall pay the price to the owner, but he shall keep the dead animal. When a man's ox injures his neighbor's ox and dies, they shall sell the live ox and divide its price. They shall also divide the dead animal. If, however, it is known that the ox was in the habit of goring and its owner had failed to guard it, he must restore the ox for ox, but shall keep the dead animal.
And one more
Right.
verse.
Okay, oh, sure. When a man steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters it or sells it, he shall pay 5 oxen for the ox and 4 sheep for the sheep.
Thank you so much. And Dave, would you like to continue there at the very start of chapter 22?
There was one more line. Yeah.
If the thief is sealed while tunneling and beaten to death, there is no blood guilt in that case. If the sun has already risen, there is blood guilt in that case. The thief must make restitution, and if lacking the means, shall be sold for the theft. But if what was stolen, whether ox or ass or sheep, is found alive and in hand, that person shall pay double. When any party who owns livestock lets it loose to graze in another's land, and so allows a field or vineyard to be grazed bare, restitution must be made for the impairment of that field or vineyard. When a fire is started and it's spread to thorns, so that stacked, standing, or growing, grain is consumed, and the one who started the fire must make restitution. When any party gives money or goods to another for safekeeping, and they are stolen from that other party's house, if caught, the thief shall pay double. If the thief is not caught, the owner of the house shall depose before God and deny laying hands on the other's property. In all charges of misappropriation pertaining to an ox, an ass, a sheep, a garment, or any other loss whereof one party alleges, this is it. The case of both parties shall come before God. The one whom God declares guilty shall pay double to the other.
Thank you so much, Dave. Catherine, would you like to pick up there at verse 9?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. When a man gives to another an ass, an ox, a sheep, or any other animal to guard, and it dies or is injured or is carried off with no witness about, an oath before Adonai shall decide between the two of them that the one has not laid hands on the property of the other. The owner must acquiesce, and no restitution shall be made. But if the animal was stolen from him, he shall make restitution to its owner. If it was torn by beasts, he shall bring it as evidence. He need not replace what has been torn by beasts. When a man borrows an animal from another and it dies or is injured, its owner not being with it, he must make restitution. If an owner was with it, no restitution need be made. But if it was hired, it is entitled to the hire. He is entitled to the hire. If a man seduces a virgin for whom the bride price has not been paid and lies with her, he must make her his wife by payment of a bride price. If her father refuses to give her to him, he must still weigh out silver in accordance with the bride price for virgins. You shall not tolerate a sorceress. Whoever lies with the beast shall be put to death. Whoever sacrifices to a god other than Adonai alone shall be proscribed. You shall not wrong a stranger or oppress him, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. You shall not ill-treat any widow or orphan. If you do mistreat them, I will heed their outcry as soon as they cry out to me, and my anger will blaze forth, and I will put you to the sword, and your own wives shall become widows, and your children orphans.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Rose, would you like to continue at verse 24?
Okay, Rabbi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. If you lend money to my people, to the poor among you, do not act toward them as a creditor, exact no interest from them. If you take your neighbor's garment in pledge, you must return it before the sun sets. It is the only available clothing. It is what covers the skin. And what else shall your neighbor sleep? Therefore, if that person cries out to me, I will pay heed, for I am compassionate. You shall not revile God, nor put a curse upon a chieftain among your people. You shall not put off the skimming of the first yield of your vats. You shall give me the male firstborn among your children. You shall do the same with your cattle and of your flocks. 7 days the male firstborn shall remain with its mother. On the 8th day you shall give it to me. You shall be holy people to me. You must not eat flesh torn by beasts. In the field you shall cast it to the dogs.
Oh, Rose, thank you so much. Let me invite Robert if you'd like to continue at the very start of chapter 23.
Yes, thank you. Thou shalt not raise a false report. Put not thine hand with the wicked to be an unrighteous witness. Thou shalt not follow a multitude to do evil, neither shalt thou speak in a cause to decline after many to wrest judgment, neither shalt thou countenance a poor man in his cause. If thou meet thine enemy's ox or his ass going astray, thou shalt surely bring it back to him again. If thou see the ass of him that hateth thee lying under his burden, and wouldest forbear to help him, thou shalt surely help with him. Thou shalt not wrest the judgment of thy poor in his cause. Keep thee far from a false matter, and the innocent and righteous slay thou not, for I will not justify the wicked. Thou shalt take no gift, for the gift blindeth the wise and perverteth the words of the righteous. And thou shalt not oppress a stranger, for ye know the heart of a stranger, seeing ye were strangers in the land of Egypt. In 6 years thou shalt sow thy land, and shalt gather in the fruits thereof. But the 7th year thou shalt let it rest and lie still. that the poor of thy people may eat, and what they leave the beasts of the field shall eat. In like manner thou shalt deal with thy vineyard and with thy olive yard. 6 days thou shalt do thy work, and on the seventh day thou shalt rest, that thine ox and thine ass may rest, and the son of thy handmaid, and the stranger may be refreshed. And in all things that I have said unto you, be circumspect, and make no mention of the name of other gods, neither let it be heard out of thy mouth.
Thank you, Robert. I'm going to invite Justin and Linda if you'd like to read a little bit, starting at verse 14.
Thank you, Rabbi. Verse 14, 3 times you shall slaughter sacrifices to me during the year. You shall observe the festival of unleavened bread. For 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread as I have commanded you, at the appointed time of the month of springtime, for then you left Egypt, and they shall not appear before me empty-handed. And the festival of the harvest, the first fruits of your labors, which you will sow in the field, and the festival of the ingathering at the departure of the year, when you gather in the products of your labors from the field. 3 times during the year, all your males shall appear before the Master, the Lord. You shall not sacrifice the blood of my sacrifice with leaven, and the fat of my festive sacrifice shall not stay overnight until morning.
The choicest of the first fruits of your soil you shall bring to the house of the Lord your God. You shall not cook a kid in its mother's milk. Behold, I'm sending an angel before you to guard you on the way and to bring you to the place that I have prepared. Beware of him and obey him. Do not rebel against him, for he will not forgive your transgression. For my name is within him. For if you hearken to his voice and do all that I say, I will hate your enemies and oppress your adversaries. For my angel will go before you and will bring you to the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, and I will destroy them. You shall not prostrate yourself before their gods, and you shall not worship them, and you shall not follow their practices, but you shall tear them down, and you shall utterly shatter their monuments. And you shall worship the Lord your God, and he will bless your food and your drink. And I will remove illness from your midst. There will be no bereaved or barren woman in your land. I will fill the number of your days.
Thank you so much, both of you. Thank you so much. I'm going to invite Deborah. Would you like to read a little bit? We're at verse 27.
Sure, thank you very much. I will send forth my terror before you, and I will throw into panic all the people among whom you come, and I will make all your enemies turn tail before you. I will send a plague ahead of you, and it shall drive out before you the Hivites, the Canaanites, and the Hittites. I will not drive them out before you in a single year, lest the land become desolate and the wild beasts multiply to your hurt. I will drive them out before you little by little until you have, I just lost my place. Until you have in out increased and possessed the land. I will set your borders from the Sea of Reeds to the Sea of Philistia, and from the wilderness to the Euphrates. For I will deliver the inhabitants of the land into your hands, and you will drive them out before you. You shall make no covenant with them and their gods. They shall not remain in your land, lest they cause you to sin against me. For you will serve their gods, and it will prove a snare to you.
Well, thank you, Deborah. And Jay and Steve, would you like to read a little bit at the very start of chapter 24?
Thank you, Rabbi. Then he said to Moses, "Come up to Hashem with Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and 70 elders of Israel, and bow down low from afar. Moses alone shall come near Adonai, but the others shall not come near, nor shall the people come up with him." Moses went and repeated to the people all the commands of Hashem and all the rules, and all the people answered with one voice, saying, "All the things that Adonai has commanded we will do." Moses then wrote them down, all the commands of Yud-Heh Vav-Heh. Early in the morning, he set up an altar at the foot of the mountain with 12 pillars for the 12 tribes of Israel. He designated some young men among the Israelites, and they offered burnt offerings and sacrificed bulls as offerings of well-being to Adonai. Moses took one part of the blood and put it in basins, and the other part of the blood he dashed against the altar. Then he took the record of the covenant and read it aloud to the people, and they said, "All that Adonai has spoken, we will faithfully do." Moses took the blood and dashed it on the people and said, "This is the blood of the covenant that Adonai now makes with you concerning all these commands." Then Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 elders of Israel ascended, and they saw the God of Israel. Under his feet there was the likeness of a pavement of sapphire, like the very sky for purity. Yet he did not raise his hand against the leaders of the Israelites. They beheld God, and they ate and drank. Adonai said to Moses, "Come up to me on the mountain and wait there, and I will give you the stone tablets with the teachings and commandments which I have inscribed to instruct them." So Moses and his attendant Joshua arose, and Moses ascended the mountain of God. To the elders he said, "Wait here for us until we return to you. You have Aaron and Hur with you. Let anyone who has a legal matter approach them." When Moses had ascended the mountain, the cloud covered the mountain. The presence of Adonai abode on Mount Sinai, and the cloud hid it for 6 days. On the seventh day, he called to Moshe from the midst of the cloud. Now the presence of Adonai appeared in the sight of the Israelites as a consuming fire on the top of the mountain. Moses went inside the cloud and ascended the mountain, and Moses remained on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights.
Thank you, and thank you, everyone. That's our entire Torah portion for the week. I'd like to share with you a focus study about this week's portion. If you have a copy of the study sheet, I invite you to take it out. And this week's Torah portion is called Mishpatim, which means laws. And when we think of laws, we think of something that's going to orient us as to a correct path, a correct way of behavior, a way of kind of setting us right. And yet, there's also something in this week's Torah portion that has the opposite effect, if you will. There's something in here that's disorienting, that sets us, there's something that is not focused on something as serious as laws, but it's something that's full of a bit of disorientation and fantasy, if you will. So that's kind of what I want to focus on the tension there between this orientation and disorientation. And to do that, on our study sheet, I've selected some verses that we just read just moments ago. So on our study sheet, which I've entitled Beginner's Mind, on number 1, we have these verses. God spoke all these words, saying, "I am Adonai, your God. You shall not make, you shall not swear falsely. Remember the Sabbath. Honor your father and mother." So these are all, if you will, reiterations of what we encountered in Parshat Yitros, the Ten Commandments. And then we have here in number 2, these verses, which Jay just read for us. Moses took the record of the covenant and read it aloud to the people, and they said, all that God has said, we shall do and we shall hear. Then God said, come up to me on the mountain. Now, presumably, when we first read that, first impression might be Moses took the record of the covenant, meaning these words extracted from and summarizing and constituting the Ten Commandments, read them out loud to the people, and then everyone said in response to that, everything that God said, that's what we're going to do that. And then we'll hear. So Rashi has this comment, a seemingly simple comment that is completely disruptive of this sense of order and orientation. He recalls in his comment a midrash that basically says, this passage, that is chapter 24, verses 1 through 12, was said before the Ten Commandments. Now, if you remember, the Ten Commandments was part of Parshat Yitro, which was a couple of portions ago. And so Rashi seems to be saying, these 12 verses, they're not in the order in which it appears they should be chronologically. There is a scrambling of these verses, and these verses 1 through 12 are actually a flashback to something that happened before the giving of the Ten Commandments. Well, if that's the case, if we look back at those verses that he's referring to, where it says Moses took the record of the covenant and read it aloud to the people, well, if it wasn't the Ten Commandments that was being read aloud to the people, well, then what was it? And exactly what did the people mean when they said, all of that, we're going to do all that, and we shall hear. What is the significance of that if it's not referring to the Ten Commandments? So here is an interpretation of what is happening. That is from Hasidic Rabbi Epstein, whose work, Meor of Hashemish, a portion of which is quoted here. So he's picking up on this midrash that is brought to us by Rashi, and he's kind of pondering, what does it mean that something was read aloud to the Israelites before the giving of the Ten Commandments, to which they said, yes, we'll do all that, and we shall hear. So here is Rabbi Epstein. How can the moment of arrival in the wilderness, a moment before Torah was given, serve as a paradigm of the eternal freshness of the words of Torah? Before the process of revelation begins, there is a spontaneous understanding that their relation to law has been inadequate. There is a resolve to imbue old forms with new meanings as the expressions of God's will. They realize they have done nothing, for all was habit and convention. So the midrash that Rabbi Epstein is referring to indicates that what Moses read to the people, to which they said, everything that God has said, we shall do and we shall hear, was not the Ten Commandments. It was the story of everything that has preceded them up to this moment. The entire story of creation, all about their ancestors, their time in Egypt, all up to this moment that they've reached here at Mount Sinai, before the revelation of Ten Commandments. And with that, the notion is that the people are now hearing all of that has preceded them, and they say, yes, we understand that, and we shall hear more. Meaning that they are now ready to go beyond what has already been presented to them, and they are anxious and ready to receive more. And in that sense, what Rabbi Epstein is indicating is that revelation is not the cause of, but the result of moving beyond old frameworks. That something that people have done has induced revelation, rather than revelation being a source of inducing some new insights for them. So we're going to play with this notion about kind of going beyond what has been presented in the way of laws and traditions and the way to do things, and a readiness to now go beyond that, which becomes a source of inducing this, what we call revelation. And in part, to put this in a bigger context, I want to kind of share with you this, where what I've been thinking about in terms of this whole story about what we call the departure from Egypt and the journey to the promised land. There are different ways that we can understand this story that has been handed down for these thousands of years. One way of understanding the departure from Egypt and the journey to the promised land is, well, it can be read as kind of a historical account. In which case, it can be kind of interesting, but may have no relevance to us on our own lives. It's something that's completely, we are completely detached from, and we're kind of looking at it as observers and interested observers, perhaps, but it's not necessarily kind of affecting our lives. Another way to look at it, perhaps there's a kind of a political message in here about what it means to seek freedom, what it means to be engaged in a battle with tyrants, in which case perhaps there's some insight there, but of course the the social and political context can be very, very different. And how do we apply those messages to our own context? And there are many other ways to read this story, and I want to share with you what our tradition tells us is the kind of the spiritual tradition, how it reads what this journey is all about. And that is, it's narrating not a series of events happening in the external world, but it's describing a dynamic that's happening in our own inner world, a journey that is happening within each one of us. So just to recapitulate what we have covered in our discussions over the last few weeks, just to go back to, if you remember, Parshat Bo, which is the time when Pharaoh says, go, leave, and the Israelites first leave. When we discussed that, we looked at the word bo, and we acknowledged that usually it gets translated as go, and we understood it to mean, as the word literally means in Hebrew, to come. And we discussed how it's an invitation by God to Moses to come inside himself and to confront the Pharaoh that exists there, to go inside the evil and the anxieties and the fears, and that it's necessary to overcome that internal Pharaoh that we all carry in order to embark upon a true journey to freedom. And then we looked at the next portion, Bishalach, with the crossing of the sea. And there we discussed that the sea itself that's being painted there by Torah may not really be a physical body of water, but instead it could be, if you will, symbolic of the deep abyss that lies within each one of us, where lurk all of our fears and our anxieties and our worries and our distresses and our sense of being separated and alone and all those worries, and how it's a message about how important it is, if you're going to become a free and fulfilled person, you need to enter into that deep, confront what's there, and emerge from it if you're going to become a free person. And then we looked at Yitro. Yitro, which tells this moment at Mount Sinai. And there, when we discussed it, we looked at how it's actually being described and all these sensory responses that people are having, the Israelites are having to this moment of the trembling of the mountain and the fire and the lightning and the thunder and the horns blasting and everything. And we considered there that perhaps this is emphasizing that this is not just an intellectual response, an analytical response to a series of laws. And laws, of course, are by nature coercive, uh, and they are serving as external restraints on our behavior. So perhaps beyond an encounter with a series of decrees, legal decrees, this sensory response that the Israelites are having uh, is actually an invitation to appreciate their own initiative, because we looked at the many commentaries and midrash that talk about 600,000 different ways of understanding Torah. That this is, rather than a suppression of individuality and initiative, this is an explosion and an invitation and a celebration of individual insight and of subjective responses to a shared phenomenon. So here we are at Mishpatim, once again, which means laws. And so here the midrash that we've referred to is that there is a response prior to that moment at Mount Sinai we call revelation, which Rabbi Epstein describes as a self-examination and a moving beyond what has already been taught. And that it is not so much about a new set of laws, but it's really about an understanding of our capacity to move beyond what's old frameworks. So I invite you to turn over our study sheet, because we're now going to look at the way this plays out in some art. And to get us started on that, I have this quote from the great poet E. E. Cummings. "The artist is no other than he who unknows what he has learned in order to know himself." Here is on our number 5. We're going to explore, what does it mean, this unknowing of what has been learned, as an element, especially in modern art, artistic process, which rejected old forms and standards and elevated the painter's subjectivity as a critical element in art. So here's a quote from a contemporary artist, Tracy Everly, who does, I would say, mostly representational art, landscapes and still lifes. And she writes on her blog, "When I paint, I begin without beginning. Another way to say it is to begin without knowing. This approach is opposite of the advice to begin with the end in mind, or to know where you're going before you start. Shoshin is a word from Zen Buddhism, meaning beginner's mind. It means having an attitude of openness, eagerness, and lack of preconception. Paint what you see, not what you think you know." So the painting that I've chosen to begin to explore this a little bit on the front is that by Ruth Feldman. Ruth Feldman spent many years as a Jewish early childhood educator, and she saw some lovely paintings at one point in a gallery, and she thought, oh, I wonder if I could do something like that. And she started to take up painting, and now she's a full-time visual artist. And what inspires her most directly are Jewish texts, Jewish prayer, Jewish liturgy, Jewish mysticism, And she tries to describe that in her visual work, not as literal translations of any of that text or any of those prayers or all that material, but she's inspired by it and she shares on the canvas her feeling, her subjective response to that material. And she describes that experience as a piercing of heaven with our prayers, which opens up a flow of blessing from above. So for her to paint in this way is, in a sense, launching a reciprocal relationship with that which is above, the source of everything. That there's something that we can do, if you will, that then induces a flow from above. Sounding a little bit similar to me, at least as the way I read what Rabbi Epstein is describing, that there's something the Israelites are doing that induces this flow from above that we call the moment of Mount Sinai, that moment of revelation. And what is that? What is that activity about? It is about not obedience. It is about an offering and a readiness of one's own initiative and subjectivity, a willingness to go beyond old forms and to explore something new. So here we have the phrase that Jay read in that last part of, in the beginning of chapter 24. We shall do and we shall hear. Oh, let me tell you just a little bit more about this painting in particular. So the waters of Abu Chav is the painting. And there's these wonderful different variations of blue and green here. And the waters of Abu Chav is referring to a synagogue that exists in Sfat in the land of Israel. And it was a synagogue that was built by, tradition tells us, the disciples of a great Kabbalist in the 15th century Spain. And one tradition about that particular synagogue is that the rabbi designed it according to Kabbalistic principles. And then when his disciples had to flee the persecution, or perhaps were even actually expelled from Spain during the Inquisition, they come to Sfat, which was then a center of Kabbalah, and they built the synagogue according to those specifications. There's another tradition, though, that says the synagogue was actually built in Spain, and then when it came time to flee Spain, the synagogue itself uprooted itself and flew overnight and relocated itself in Sfat. So here is Ruth Feldman, and she's taking these colors, which in a sense are an attempt to, if you will, as she described it, pierce heaven with our prayers and open up a flow of blessing from above. So perhaps what she's trying to do here is kind of, if you will, erase the barrier that exists between sky and sea, between above and below, and the fact that she incorporates this reference to Abu Chav. Maybe she's also playing with the notion that it's even possible to transcend this time-spatial limits that we all think that we live within. That a synagogue can actually uproot itself overnight and transport itself to the land of Israel. It's a bit of fantasy. It's a bit of play about something that is indeed very serious. So here we are, the phrase that we encountered in chapter 24, verse 7, we shall do and we shall hear. Remembering that within this midrash that Rashi has brought us to and that Rabbi Epstein has commented on, we shall do and we shall hear, if you will, is now being read as a call of readiness to move beyond what has already existed in terms of instructions. And so here we have this preliminary verse from Psalm 103. God's angels, who are mighty of strength, who do God's word, to hear the voice of God's word. philosopher Emmanuel Levinas plays with this notion about hearing and doing, and he writes, they do before hearing. It is a secret of angels. We shall do and we shall hear, which seems to us contrary to logic. That's the order of angelic existence. This shocks logic and can pass for blind faith or the naivete of childish trust. Yet it is what underlies any inspired act, even artistic. For the act only brings out the form in which it only now recognizes its model, never glimpsed before. It's fascinating that Emmanuel Levinas refers to this naivete of childish trust. In my weekly article, I mentioned a little bit about child mind and the unique capacity that the child mind has for making so many connections, if you will, and is open to making those connections. So, in a sense, he's indicating here this suspension of our critical faculty, or perhaps an infusion of naivete into our critical mind. That is, the child mind and the adult mind somehow finding some kind of fusion together here. And that's part of what it means to be an angel, perhaps, or to be able to listen as angels listen. Here's the way Aviva Zornberg, in her book, The Particulars of Rapture, covers this moment. The new era dawns, therefore, before the Torah is given. The Torah comes to answer a human readiness for a revisioning of culture. God as transformative presence comes commanding from the outside, but the desire for God comes from within human consciousness. So this all contributes to this notion of what Torah is now helping us understand, that part of this journey of leaving behind the land of fear, which can produce in people the need to oppress others, to blame others, to make others bear our work, that in order to transcend that land of narrowness, that land of Mizraim, that narrowness that we call Egypt, and to go on a journey of fulfillment to become a whole person again. That one of the things it requires is, if you will, a beginner's mind, a readiness to forego all of one's preconceptions, all of one's biases, all of the assumptions that the way I've been doing things is the only right way to do them, and to allow one's child mind to become more operative, to look for an openness, to make more connections rather than to shut down possibilities and to become more rigid, as adult minds tend to become as we get older. So this is a way of reading the departure from Egypt and a march to the land of Canaan as a description of the transformation of self, which becomes a prerequisite to creating a covenantal community and to living in the world in love rather than in anxiety. So with that, I'd love to know what you encountered, what you felt, how you responded to the reading of this portion. Love to call upon you. Catherine, please share with us. Go ahead.
Yes. I realized a new dimension when you were talking about opening yourself up to be able to transcend what you already habitually follow. A new dimension to the fact that these instructions are given orally before they're given in written form. Because if you don't give them orally, people cannot begin to stretch their imaginations as they listen to what is possible. And the written form has quite another function, of course, which is to preserve those instructions for future reference, but it's not the same.
So I great. So I can't find the exact part in the material that we read tonight, but I noticed that one of the verbs that gets translated into English as speak is actually the verb having to do with the notion of story. And so there is something that's very compelling in here, which comes up in a lot of other commentaries, that there's one commentary that basically says the whole purpose of this, what we call the Exodus, is to have a story to tell about it. And Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, one of the great Hasidic rabbis, talked about the power of storytelling to transform human beings. And why is that? It's because the story, more than reading a legal text, a story has the capacity to involve people in the tale. You imagine yourself as a character, and then you become an activist, and then that activism then does something within you as well, rather than feeling that someone is lecturing you. You become an agent in the story. So, and I'm trying to remember, I think it's, I hope I get this right, that it's Levinas himself uh, who talks about a reader being someone who saves a book from the fate of being a book. That because a book has a front cover and a back cover, and you think that it thus defines knowledge, that it defines what it means because it has a beginning and an end.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so to read, if you will, helps a book become something more than a book. It becomes something alive in the world. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, let me invite Rose. Go ahead, please.
Oh, thank you, Rabbi. Um, I was kind of, this portion really, to my mind, I was interested in looking at other codes. And of course, I looked at the Code of Hammurabi, which is the great code that this is usually compared with. And it's kind of interesting in that if you look at the Code of Hammurabi, there's some things that are very similar. They talk about the thief who tunnels into the house, and like if you kill the thief at night, you get off. If you kill him during the day, you don't get off because you were able to see him, presumably. But the Code of Hammurabi said you do that, death. And death is probably, I counted it up, the punishment is death in Hammurabi about 80% of the time, which is kind of interesting. Because if you look at this code that's in Mishpatim, it's really not. And in fact, one of the things where it says that you make an offering to a strange god, the punishment is just going into harem. It's not really, being killed. So compared with the other codes that were present at that time, this is a very reasonable and, nonviolent code. I mean, even if you look at in England, I mean, or France or Europe, from until very recently, the punishment for a lot of stuff was death. So, I mean, I think that this is a very groundbreaking and humane code.
Fascinating.
It's saying the purpose behind this is not to scare you or to beat you into submission or control you. It's a positive thing to say, you should do this or don't do this, to be holy, to be more like me, because, the two names for the God Elohim, which we usually translate as the God of justice, and then Hashem, Yahweh, the God of mercy. And that's really what is being said here. Like, yeah, you got to do what's right, but you should remember the stranger. You should remember that you were in a bad place and try to put that into the equation when you encounter other people. So it's not just the legalistic thing, it's how you should be with other people. Be a mensch. I look at the 11th commandment, like, don't be a jerk. Life is hard enough. Don't be a jerk.
So I'm so glad. So you've kind of focused on this notion of a code and comparing it with others. So this portion is so ripe for achieving that level of understanding that you're sharing with us. And it is a portion that, although it's called Mishpatim, there is embedded in this week's portion this notion that this is not really about obedience. Obedience connotes a kind of contraction of one's self. You obey what someone else is telling you to do.
The state is in charge.
Yeah, so that rather than understanding this as being about obedience, it is really about expansion of one's capabilities and capacities. It is really about fostering human initiative and creativity. And we see that there's one example in here that is so profound about that. And we read that when we read eye for eye, tooth for tooth, bruise for bruise, that language, which seems pretty clear. You poke out someone's eye, you're going to get your eye poked out, and so forth and so on. The rabbis, when they begin to develop the material that becomes known as the Talmud, they said, it doesn't really mean that. It's really talking about payment of monetary compensation for an injury. It could literally mean an eye for an eye is the correct form of justice, because what would happen if the person who poked out your eye was blind? What kind of justice would it be to poke out a blind person's eye? How does that compensate you? How does that balance out things? So they say, so it is a way of the rabbis using their creativity, their initiative, expanding beyond the apparent literal meaning of the words that we've just read to come up with an artistry, if you will, that begins to paint a picture about what justice and human behavior should be about. So thank you for getting us focused on that. Let me call upon Jay. And you'll need to unmute yourself, Jay.
The three words that mean the most, please unmute yourself. Used to be I love you. Now it's please unmute yourself.
I love you too.
Okay. It's interesting. The rabbis that we're talking about in Talmudic and times of Safat, the rabbis of the Rabbinical Assembly of the United Synagogue of America, who edited this Torah that I'm reading here, this version, they say, and if I may, there's an analogy here that seems to tie together a lot of things we're saying here. They say the literal meaning of the two words, na'aseh and nishma, is we will do and we will obey. So I don't know the three root letters, but we will obey. Okay. This famous reply represents the Israelites' faithful acceptance of their role as God's chosen people. The sages were impressed by the eagerness with which the Israelites accepted the burdens of being God's people and following God's laws. To say, I will do, even before one understands, is to say, I have faith that God will lead me in the proper path. According to Talmudic legend, the angels were so impressed with this show of faith that they came down from heaven and placed 2 crowns on the head of each Israelite, one for doing na'aseh and one for obeying or seeking to understand v'nishma. The Israelites could have responded, as most would do today, we will seek to understand, and if we are persuaded, we will agree to do them. Instead, having met God in Egypt, at the sea, and at Mount Sinai, the Israelites trusted that God's demands would be reasonable and in their best interest. Just as we accept medicine from our physician on trust, without understanding what it is or how it works, and commit ourselves to marriage, to parenthood, and to a career as acts of faith before we fully understand what they entail, so too do the Israelites accept God's will. There are many things in life that we cannot appreciate before we have lived them and come to appreciate their value. You must do them first, na'aseh, and only afterward realize why. Nishma.
Okay, and what do you draw from all that? You shared what's in that book.
I have always in my latter half of my days here, I have always marveled at the allegorical, the artistic allegorical part of the words we read. Meaning, you're right, Rabbi. This is a personal journey among the Israelites and also amongst ourselves. I look at faith a little differently. That's a discussion for another time. But as far as faith, I think that the Israelites were willing to take that gamble and say, this guy has shown himself to be a pretty good Joe before. Okay, we're going to do this. We're going to see how it turns out. But they had a distinct feeling, because look at how they had already seen the chains of bondage broken. They had seen all of this. So they had to take things on a faith which was different than a faith in God. It was a faith in what they were being asked to do. And they say, hey, look, we're going to listen to it. And pretty darn sure we're going to obey. We're going to go along with this. Okay. It wasn't to make them happy. So that's the thing. Happiness it was survival. Okay. That's it.
So first of all, it's always good to go back to this lesson that there is no word in biblical Hebrew for obey. Right? There's no word in biblical Hebrew for obey. So this notion about hearing is the closest thing. But that hearing, as we've been reading and exploring through our various commentaries, that hearing has to do with an invitation to expand your capacities as an initiating human being. You didn't leave behind enslavement and obedience to Pharaoh merely to change dictators, even a divine dictator. The departure from Egypt is a departure from constraint and narrowness and fear, and it's to go into the expanse of responsibility, initiative, caring and compassion and love. And so the call that what is being heard is the call that says, you can be greater than you are right now. And I need you to exercise all of your human creativity and initiative to remake yourself and to remake the world into a place where I can dwell, where the presence of God can dwell. So it's an invitation not to obey, it's an invitation to expand yourself and into full realization of what a human being can be. Okay, so thank you.
Excellent. Yes.
Let me call upon Robert. Yeah.
Well, thank you again for a lovely evening. This word faith is so interesting because it goes the gamut of blind faith, which I would say is no faith at all, or conscious knowledge. And I think the only way to confirm the sincerity of that conscious knowledge is that we're either willing to live or die for it. But faith is one of these words like love that has so much power, but it depends what side of the blade we use. So there are people, there was a fellow years ago I knew, and thank God, just very briefly. And he was somebody who spent his life on trivial pursuits. He had significant amount of money. He was filled with himself, not particularly bright, but he did well materially. And I was having a chat with him very briefly about belief in God. And his response was, well, when I'm older and I no longer want to do all these things, yeah, I'll believe in God. And I thought to myself, my God, this is spiritual idiocy. But conscious knowledge, where we've done the work, we've really thought about our faith, whatever it is. Is it sincere? Are we simply, do I follow my faith out of blindness or because of my parents, whatever? Or is it something I'm willing to give my life for? So I really appreciate this word of faith coming up because it's one of these that really, for me, I always have to examine myself because if I say I have faith in Baha'u'llah, which, for me, I say I do. Now, how do I live my life? Is it in conformity with that? So thank you. I want to thank Jay for bringing up this word, which has so much power in it. And again, I always enjoy these evenings, and you're very kind to let me come.
So it's fascinating to have this notion about faith being discussed here towards the concluding our concluding time together. What it makes me think of is the Akedah Yitzhak, the binding of Isaac, and Abraham bringing Isaac up there. And one way of understanding that moment is a testing of Abraham's faith in God. A deeper way of reading that moment and of reading the Hebrew that describes that moment is that it's really a moment where Abraham, it's not Abraham who's being tested by God, but it's Abraham testing God. And so if it's a moment of faith, that moment on the mountaintop of Isaac and Abraham, then in Judaism, faith is driven by questioning. And so it's that it's a perhaps a different notion than perhaps some other traditions have about the notion of faith. Just as what often gets translated as obeying is really the verb to hear. Okay. And so to hear means to bring things into existence, if you will. So this notion about faith is not so much a passive experience, but it is really an experience of interrogation and of exploration. And so this is what I think this chapter in particular, this portion in particular, is telling a story about what does it mean to become a fully actualized human being? Well, part of it has to do with seeking a form of practice, spiritual practice, that prevents us from becoming narrow-minded. Because narrow-mindedness is what we left behind in Egypt, hopefully. That's the dimension of narrowness. Narrowness which leads to brutality, which leads to oppression, which leads to binding of others. Okay, and so if we're going to leave that behind, a key aspect of that is not just to walk out of a place where we have been physically enslaved, that's the easy part. The much harder and lifelong part is to expunge the traumatic impacts of having lived that way previously out of our system, so that we are no longer the oppressor of others, so that we are no longer continually finding ourselves limiting what we think we can do and what we can be. Okay? So this is emerging out of a realm of narrowness and constraint into an expanse of openness and possibility, and ultimately of covenantal relationships, where we take responsibility for one another and for ourselves. And we live not in fear, but we live in love. And I just want to thank everyone for helping to create that sense of being in love with one another. And that doesn't, what that sense of love means is to have a sense of openness to one another, to seeing the beauty and the possibilities, the uniqueness, the individuality, the readiness to hear your uniqueness and subjectivity. And when we bring all of our subjectivity together and display it on the canvas of life, hopefully we bring some beauty into this world, which is the dwelling of the divine among us. God bless you all. Thank you so much. I look forward to our next gathering. Be well, everyone. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Rabbi.
Thank
Thank
you,
you so
Rabbi.
much, Rabbi.
Thank
Be
you, Rabbi.
well. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.